Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. I was thinking about one of the things lately that we've talked about in the past, but we haven't really delved into, and that's how to cope with coping mechanisms. And the reasons to do it. We talk about our coping mechanisms a lot, and I know I had a lot that weren't very healthy. And some people, of course, if your coping mechanism is self-harm, it's very important to get some kind of professional help, because even though these techniques will help, these guidelines will help, you really should seek professional help if you're coping with self-harm, because that's a very serious issue. But
well, and also, even however we're coping, if they're not coping skills we've learned later in life or in counseling, often we've learned them as children. And so they worked, but they don't work once we're adults. And there's that verse in the Bible in Corinthians. It says, when I was a child, I acted as a child, and now that I'm an adult. And I've always looked to that verse because it's really easy then to get stuck. And that's where we talk so much about how our behaviors are affecting other people. And we don't even recognize it because we're just coping. And the coping behaviors could be anger, they could be manipulation, and they're not healthy. They're just learned, and they're just strictly survival mode. And so when we can find a way to look at them, we can get out of survival mode and get more to survivor and get out of victim to survive.
And, it's, I guess the most important thing first is to recognize what your coping mechanisms are and when they happen. I know for me, a lot of the time it was habitual. I just got in the habit of always coping with alcohol or drugs or both. And then even when I wasn't dealing with issues, if I wasn't dealing with triggers or anything, I was just habitually using those as a crutch to just get through without having to think about anything or deal with anything. So I think the first issue, the main issue, is to recognize what our coping mechanisms might be.
How did you get to that point that you recognized it?
When I realized they were so unhealthy for me, when I realized I was, on a very self-destructive path, and I started looking at why I was using them, why I needed the crutch so much, why I needed to do it so much.
Did that come after you had done some counseling, or did it come before and you went, I need help? How did that work for you?
It was actually after, and I realized that my ambition was just to get wasted most of the time, and I looked forward to just doing that. That was the way I dealt with reality, was to tune out of reality. And it, it worked in a lot of ways, but it was so unhealthy for me. And it was so destructive as far as I'd never had any ambition other than to get wasted. And that just wasn't, I had no ambition to be anything or do anything. And so I had to realize, look, this isn't getting me anywhere. This is just leading to the spiral downwards. So I started just trying to find other methods. And that's what I kind of want to talk about, is what the other methods are that can help you cope with your coping mechanisms once you recognize them.
Also, coping mechanisms are eating or not eating. And the one lady who told me she went to get counseling for weight loss, and they sent her to a trauma therapist. because they recognized it was a coping mechanism. She didn't recognize that. She just knew she was done and she needed to lose weight, and then come to find out, oh, that's why I have this issue, is because this is how I've been coping. So sometimes it's not really being aware so much that it is a coping, is that looking at and finding something that's really not working in your life, and then saying, wait, maybe this is happening because of some trauma.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily just sex or drugs or alcohol. It could be food. It could be shopping. It could be hoarding. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, hoarders are people that can't let go, and there's a reason they can't let go. They're holding on. They're all ways of having control in your life. And even though, with me, with drugs and alcohol, it seemed like I was out of control, I was actually controlling my life by having this time where I was in control of what I did, and what I did wasn't healthy, but I was in control of it. And so that's one of the things about it, is you're trying to control your life because you feel like you don't have control. Mm-hmm. And part of it might be
perfectionism, excessive cleaning. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many things that may seem good on some level that maybe aren't. And I was the opposite of you, because of the abuse in my family. There was so much alcohol and alcoholism, which were little kids at this parties, and we see people behaving just crazy, and they don't even remember the next day. And I remember I was never going to be out of control. So I didn't drink. I never even drank in high school. I don't think I really drank until I was maybe 40 or 50, because I was not going to be out of control. And that's okay to not drink, but also it's not a healthy reason to not drink.
Well, yeah. I mean, when we're dealing with control, and that's part of it, is we're triggered by something. And so our brain is telling us we got to do something because of this trigger. And in order to feel like we have control in our life, we resort to doing things that aren't healthy. And we might not think they're harmful, but when they start to take control of our lives, then we're stuck, basically. Yeah. So how do you get unstuck?
That's a great question.
That's the question. And there's ways of dealing with it that we've talked about, like the breathing. And that's actually really important, because when we talked about the maps and how to change our map, we're talking about the frontal and the back part of our brains. And when you're doing conscious breathing, you're getting back into your body. And so you can gain control in a way that you're aware of your surroundings. You're not stuck in that map that's telling you have to do this one thing, whatever it is.
Or you have to run, or you have to, it's like getting really present and being aware that, because when we get triggered, we think we're back at that very same place where we were hurt. And so when we get present, we can recognize, oh, wow.
Yeah, when you gain control of your breathing by having conscious breathing, you realize that you are safe. You're not being threatened necessarily, because this trigger makes you feel like you're in threat. You're being threatened, and you have to run or hide or fight back, all those different, reactions. But when you do the conscious breathing, that brings you back into your body and your senses, and you realize, okay, I don't have to feel threatened right now. There's also a lot of other ways that you can do it. And one of the main things is, like for me, when I would get triggered, I would automatically want to do drugs or alcohol. And one of the things that helps is to wait, to stop, to take time and find something else to do, find something that calms you or reassures you or gives you comfort that isn't that coping mechanism. So take time, and they say if you can wait 15 minutes, by that time, that urge will pass. So at first you might not be able to wait that long, but it's good to just wait and see how long you can take a pause, find something else to do, keep busy, walk your dogs, in my case, do some chores around the house, do laundry, do the dishes, do something something constructive instead. Read the paper. Do something to kind of distract you so you don't have that urge that's so strong. And if you can get kind of past that 15-minute threshold, then you'll be past that urge and you can put it down. And it's important to try that, and maybe you won't be able to last that long at first, but every time you try it, you should be able to get better and better at it. And you can pause, do something else, find something that you can do instead that's constructive, that's not going to affect you in a harmful way, or that's going to just go back to your old routine. Find some other routine that isn't so harmful. And that's one of the most important things, is to pause. And even at that pause, you can do the breathing exercise to get yourself back in your senses, and then you can find something to do to keep you busy, and you won't be so set on, okay, I have to cope right now.
Yeah. Sometimes when I do the breathing, if I'm in a situation, I'll just say, when I'm breathing in, I'll say, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And when I breathe out, I'll say something like gratitude, like thank you, because it's a way of reminding us, because that inner child is panicking. Yeah. I'm okay. Thank you. Just simple things like that, doing it a couple times. It's amazing how then our brain goes, oh, we're okay.
Yeah. Or even, I can get through this. I can handle this. I'm okay. I can get through this. I can handle this. I'm okay. It sounds simple, but it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
But there's other triggers that I know for me cause me to be really angry or really anxious or fearful. And so sometimes you need to do something physical. I know for me, at first, I punched a lot of pillows. I just took it out on my pillows. I'd punch them, I'd take them and smash them on the wall. Do something physical if you're feeling fear or anger. For me, it was the anger that I was afraid of letting out, but it was just boiling up inside me. Rather than do something harmful to yourself, you can take it out on something. You can tear up something. You can beat up a pillow. You can smash, something that doesn't matter. Take a hammer to, something you don't care about.
When I was raising my kids, a lot of times people would just stop by my house. People don't really do that anymore. But I always would buy all these mugs and things from the thrift because I did some crafts with them. And if someone came over mad, I had a whole brick wall outside and a garden under it. And we would just throw them at the brick wall. And then if we needed to make them smaller for the garden, we'd hammer them. And there's just really something to doing that in a way that you're not, you're destroying something, but it's not hurting anyone.
You're not hurting anyone, or you're not hurting yourself, and you're not resorting to, a mechanism that is not healthy. And the other thing is just yelling, screaming, just crying out in rage. That helped me a lot too. Luckily I had a place where I lived that my neighbors never complained, and there were times when I'd play really loud music and just yell. And sometimes that's so cathartic, and it gets that rage out of you to where you can get to that point of feeling, okay, I'm okay now. I can handle this now. But sometimes you need that initial outburst, but you have, it helps to find a way that's not harmful.
Right, that you're not yelling at your partner or your kids, but you're doing it in a way that it's therapeutic for yourself.
Yeah, in a place that's not going to affect anyone else. But also sometimes when we're triggered, we go into panic of anxious or fearful, or we're depressed. I know for me, sometimes I just go into this deep depression, and that's when it's important to find a way of taking care of yourself in a way that makes you feel comforted, that makes you feel like you're okay, that, you're going to be okay.
That's why it's so good to have a support group or a counselor or a friend that you can call, or even like in AA, a sponsor, somebody that you can reach out to. Because here's the one thing I struggle with. I know all these things. But sometimes I don't want to get out of it. I have a day where maybe I'm really depressed, and it's maybe not even having to do with my childhood stuff. It's everything else. But because of that, it's familiar to me. Yeah. And I know if I get up and go for a walk, I'll feel better. But there's that part of me that's like, no, I want to feel bad because I'm unworthy. I'm mad. I don't like this. And I feel helpless. And so that's why I feel like often it is so important to have an accountability person, because sometimes I'll just say for me, it's hard because I know what to do to feel better. It's almost like a diet. If you eat that ice cream, you're going to feel like crap, but you want to eat it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like finding the balance and the support, because we're not going to be perfect, but also that we don't have to do this alone. And I think that the panic and the fear comes from that being alone and being helpless.
And that feeling of that, you have no control and no one's going to come to your help. No one's going to come to your aid. But there's ways of feeling safe, even when you are alone or if you don't have anyone to reach out to, and finding that comfort without reaching out to drugs or alcohol or your other, shopping or eating.
Whatever
there's other ways of doing it, to find a safe place to just bundle up and huddle, or to find a comfort pillow or something that makes you feel better. For me, smells. There's certain smells that made me feel happy and joyous and comforted.
Like dinner?
Yeah. Food. Yeah, definitely food. But even just like you said, going for a walk is a really good way of just kind of regaining your senses and not feeling so all alone. Even though you might be alone on your walk, you're out in nature and you're experiencing life around you, so you don't feel so isolated.
And it's so easy to like ruminate, to keep thinking the same thought over and over. And I don't know if you've heard of Tony Robbins. He's a master coach. And when he does his big events, he'll be coaching one person. There's like thousands of people there. And this person is stuck and they're going, yeah, but they can't get out of that cycle. And he'll ask them I don't necessarily agree with, it's his way. I agree with the thing he's doing. I don't like, he'll go ask them about their sex life. And they're like, but what it does is it breaks that. It breaks that rumination, and that's what he's doing. And often somebody might do that for us. If we're just cycling, they might ask us a question that totally gets us thinking a different way, a distraction. But it's a little harder for us to do it for ourselves. But it just shows you that if we're willing to do it, if we're willing to go, wait, I'm going to shake this up, I'm not going to do this, that we will feel better, and the struggle will be easier. And we might even, like you say, find some joy. If we go on a walk, we might see a butterfly.
Yeah, or even a bird, or something that out there that reminds us we're not all alone. We're part of this amazing place. So
so you said breathing, and then the other one was.
So yeah, it depends. It kind of depends on what's causing you to go to your coping mechanisms. If it's anger and you're stressed, there's ways of coping that you can deal with it physically to kind of get it out without harming yourself. If you're depressed or sad, there's ways of getting comfort to make find a nice pillow or a big blanket you can wrap yourself up in, cuddle on the couch, or have some
kind of self-nurturing.
Yeah, stuffed toys that you feel close to, or even just listening to music that makes you feel better. And there's also the breathing. But I think one of the things for me was the repetition. I always would cope the same way every day, all the time. And you have to get out of that cycle. And for me, it was recognizing my repetition, recognizing my cycle, and trying to change that, trying to do something else instead, finding healthier ways of dealing with it. And for me, that was just reading or writing or doing something that occupied myself completely, so I wouldn't be distracted by wanting to do the drugs and alcohol, something that would really take up my mind. Would really wrap me up. And I wouldn't want to be drinking or doing any drugs because that would be distracting. And so
something that worked for me that I didn't realize, I didn't understand it until later in my life, was journaling. And that was something our mom made us do every day because she was a frustrated writer and we hated it. But also, I still journal. Sometimes I take a little break, but getting those things out, like even if I'm so mad at my friend, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, well, I did show up late, or, it's like, it's when we don't have someone to talk to, it's a way to process and to kind of get those emotions and feelings out. And for me, when I would look back, my handwriting if it was scribbly and I was mad, and plus I'm left-handed, so I'm messy anyway. But then other days it would be nice and beautiful. It's like, it kind of showed that it reflected kind of where I was at, and I didn't understand, but I feel like it was probably one of the things that actually saved my mental health. Growing up.
Yeah. And for me, when I started journaling and started writing just every day, regardless of if I felt like I had anything to say, I would come up with these surprising things just by, I'd be writing along, and then all of a sudden things would come into my head that I wasn't really aware of when I started. And I'd have all these things come up, and I'd be like, wow, I didn't realize I was thinking about that, or I didn't realize that was going on. And so it really is a helpful way of self-exploration, and especially when you're going through therapy or getting the help that you need to cope with this stuff, you realize, and that also gave me insight into my coping mechanisms. It gave me insight to why I was doing the things that I didn't always want to, but I did anyway. And I sort of worked it out by just talking about it in writing. And like you said, if you don't have anyone to talk about, to just writing it out is a way of getting it out of your head. So you can, but yeah, I think a lot of these coping mechanisms we have are just ways of
getting away from pain.
Getting away from reality, getting away from what we're dealing with, and not having to be in our head. You know, it's a way of tuning out. And so journaling is great because you're actually kind of tuning in, and you're learning more about yourself rather than just tuning out. And, you know, I think a big coping mechanism for a lot of people today, including myself sometimes, is your social media or your phone or
scrolling.
News and social media. It's an easy way to check out. And you could just check out for hours.
I had a client say, my self-care was getting on social media. But then she said, what I realized is that wasn't self-care. That was avoidance. I was using that to avoid what I didn't want to focus on.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy that we do it without thinking. And then an hour or two later, we're going, holy cow, I wanted to get something done today. And I've just sat here on the couch looking at my phone for 2 hours. So, but it's very important to understand our coping mechanisms and also to see what we can do, because if we're stuck in a routine and we're stuck just doing things because we learned it when we were young and we learned that helped us, and then we're never going to get past that routine. We're going to just keep using that. And it's hard to get progress. Even if you're doing therapy and you're doing all this stuff, you think you're doing great, but you're still stuck in this routine, then it's like you take one step forward and you're still going 2 steps back because you're still relying upon this coping method.
Well, and I think that's where good relationships are so helpful, because we might be able to say to a partner, if we feel safe with them, hey, I think this is a coping mechanism that I'm using. What do you think? And you might be able to really explore that, where with a counselor, they're not with you every day. They don't see the kind of things that you're doing. And so it's a way to get some reflection.
Yeah, and of course, with a counselor, we don't always talk about the things that we think are just fine. This is no big deal.
So I drink a little. So I yell a little.
It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So it is helpful to have, an objective viewpoint that will give you actual insight.
Right. And here's the thing. When we do recognize these things and we do the work, because we don't have to. Many people don't. But when we do, when we really begin to look into it and we read some books, we go to counseling, we listen to some podcasts, what happens is we get more peace in our life. And even then, sometimes that takes a while to get used to because we're not used to it. It's unfamiliar. So we want to go back to our chaos. But I have found there is such joy in shedding the chaos. And even though the peace might feel like, a little at first, what I recognize is that in being peaceful, that's where I have better ideas. That's where I end up with better friendships. That's where I am doing more things that I love and that really nurture me. But at first, I kind of needed that chaos.
Yeah, I know for me, I had a lot of friendships that were based on chaos and because that's what I knew and that's what I understood and was comfortable with.
Hmm.
But they weren't really good friends and they weren't really healthy relationships. And I was just hanging on because I thought that's what was normal. And in some ways, I liked the chaos and I looked forward to it
Hmm.
and would thrive on it,
Hmm.
but it was just messing up my life.
Yeah.
And so it was comfortable, but it was also a mess.
Yeah, I think
And
that, I don't know if they call that ambivalence, but it's those two things that are warring. And
hmm
it's easy to go, I don't want to be one of those peaceful people, but that's
hmm
not what peace is. You can
no,
be active and creative and busy and still have peace versus chaos.
yeah. And what it comes down to, I think, is we want to control our life, but
Well, we
we're
think we are. We
yeah,
think we
but
are.
we're controlling it with these things that aren't,
We're not controlling it at all.
yeah.
That's the illusion. I've had to really come to grips with that with my son, because
hmm
the one who's, in active addiction, because there's nothing that I can do to control or to fix him.
Yeah,
And, sometimes people say, well, what are you going to do? Well, there is nothing
yeah,
I can
yeah.
do. I cannot control this. I can only surrender it and give it up. And I think that sometimes that feels like weakness,
hmm
or it feels like you don't care, like maybe I don't care. But I have found that, and I don't even know if surrender is really the right word, but just giving it up to God and saying he's yours. I mean, every single morning I pray for this boy. Every single morning I give him to God, because I can't do anything, but I
Yeah,
can do everything by praying.
yeah.
And, so when we can start to give up these bad behaviors and surrender them, we get more peace in our life. And then that's when things start to change, because we might say, why does God, why do these people get blessed and I don't? Why,
hmm
and sometimes it's because we're holding on to all these
Yeah.
things that aren't serving us anymore.
And that's one of the things that helps us with these coping mechanisms because we're using them to control our lives, even though we're not aware of it necessarily sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But is to let go of control sometimes. And that's not easy. Like you're doing, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And there's ways of doing it. Like for me, I'm used to be a very aggressive driver and I used to, and one of the ways, I drive a work van with this big billboard of my, company on it. So ever since I started driving this work van with this big billboard of my company on it,
How's my driving?
exactly. So I've had to let go of trying to control everyone else's driving because I have no control over the driving. But when you're an aggressive driver, you think you can do something about everyone else. And it makes no sense, but that's the way I was. But now I just let things go. And that's one of the ways you can kind of ease up on this needing to be in control all the time, which
And
is
how does it, like, you had to come to a place to let go, then you worked on it. And how does it feel now when you're driving? Because you've kind of let go and you're not in that place of anxiety. How is it when you drive now?
it's so much easier. It's so much easier to just not worry about what other people are doing. And it's actually harder to be driving with someone if they're driving and they are all about everyone else. And I realize I used to be that way, but when they're that way, it's like, well, don't worry about them. They don't have any idea that you're pissed off at them. And if they do, they don't even care. And so just leave it. That's what I've had to learn is just leave it. And there's ways of letting go of letting go of control that helps you with these coping mechanisms because most of these coping mechanisms are trying to control our lives because we've lost control because of what's happened to us. We feel like we don't have control of our lives. I mean, so much of anorexia and all the eating disorders are just controlling our bodies because we don't feel like we have control in our lives. So many disorders are just trying trying to control ourselves. And
Mhm.
if we can let control in other ways, it helps
And
us to learn to let go of control all the time so we feel like we aren't helpless. Because that's part of what it is when we feel like we have to have control, is we feel like we're helpless. But when you let go of that needing to be in control, you realize you aren't helpless. And so you don't need to do these things.
Yeah, and when you think about it, this is the thing that I noticed is a lot of these things we do, we think they're helping us get out of pain, then we think they're helping us make us feel better, but they're making
Mm-hmm.
us feel worse. You know, if we're overweight, if we're underweight, if we're sick,
Mm-hmm.
if we're on drugs and alcohol. And what I noticed that, you know, sometimes that you can tell that maybe you have some of these coping mechanisms that aren't good are those things. But also if you overreact to something, like something
Mm-hmm.
little, like you spill the milk and you have a monumental reaction, that's a sign that
Yeah.
something wrong. Or say you're feeling okay and you're not okay with feeling okay. So what do? We pick a fight with our spouse
Mm-hmm.
or our kids.
Yeah.
So we can feel bad. And I see that a lot. And I think that's kind of in the same category. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's part of just being familiar with the sense of being out of control. And so when things are just static, so to speak, they're nothing's changing, nothing's happening, nothing bad is going on, we wonder why. And we wonder what there must be something else going on because everything's normal and I'm
Mhm.
not used to normal.
Yeah, there's
And
a saying, make the familiar unfamiliar. So
mm,
that if overreacting or if that becomes unfamiliar, then you're going to gravitate to the things that are actually calming.
Yeah. So I think first steps is just kind of recognizing what we're using for coping
Hmm.
and when we're using it. Is it a regular basis? Is it something that we routinely do? Is it just every day I do this because that helps me just cope with everything? Or is it something that we do when we're triggered, when we're feeling anxious or depressed, and then try different techniques? Try the
Yeah.
breathing technique, try comfort, or trying if you're feeling anger or rage or fear, try doing something active, even just physically active. But again, for men, a lot of the coping mechanism is just the being very physical, doing weightlifting, doing things to feel, doing martial arts, doing boxing, doing something to feel like you're in control. And so I guess it's looking at what makes you feel like you're in control, and is that really healthy, or are you out of control with that?
Well, and often we hear about this. People will give up one addiction for another.
Hmm.
They may quit drinking and they start eating. They may, so again, it's finding that something you've said about, it's almost like look at it in your life. Look at the thing that like you're not really happy with. Like
Hmm.
you kind of got to that point, you're like, this drinking isn't working for me. Find the
Yeah.
thing you're not really happy with. And then when you start looking at it, you're going to realize it's part of your trauma. Most likely. I mean, that's what I see in
Hmm.
recovery. And then when you start to recognize that, then that's when you can start to do that work because now you understand what it is. And now you can do the breathing. You can, get up and go for a walk. You can start to begin that cycle of healing.
Yeah. And also find the thing that's your crutch, because it might not be something you're disappointed or unhappy with, but if you absolutely have to, you can't live without it. Why is that? What is it that it has such control in your life? Because if it's, you
I don't
know,
know. I can't live without my car, Kevin. I don't
well,
care.
that's a little different. No, I mean,
I
if
hear
it's
what
a
you're saying.
activity that you
Yeah.
have to do all the time and you just can't,
Mhm.
not do it. That's your routine.
Right. And people will say, well, that's just the way I am. And I
Hmm.
always am like, we are never set. We can
Hmm.
always change.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way I am. That I hear a lot of people say that, and that is just not true.
Yeah.
It's the
So
way you are. It's the way you are, but it's not the way you have to
have
be.
to be.
Yeah.
So there's the steps to take are like to take a pause, wait, see if you can do without it for 15 minutes. Do some breathing exercises, maybe do some things to cope that aren't unhealthy. Find something you can do, keep yourself busy that's not the coping mechanism. journaling, talking, writing about or talking about with someone, contacting someone, and maybe finding other outlets that aren't going to be harmful to yourself or to others.
Mm-hmm.
And then see if that helps you and it's going to be gradual because it's not something you could just stop.
Wouldn't that be great?
Well, actually, if you just stopped, it's not always really healthy because you've been so dependent upon it that if you just abruptly stop, there might be other fallout. You might just find another crutch that isn't as harmful, but is still a crutch. It's important to find things that aren't necessarily a crutch that you're going to just rely on instead. So, yeah, that's kind of the problem is we have these coping mechanisms for a reason, and they do help us to a point, but it's the harm that they cause that we're trying to counter. But often we just go from one coping mechanism to another, and that's what you were talking about. We just find a different crutch, and that's not healthy either. You want to have control over your coping mechanisms, but part of it is just letting go of control, because that's part of the issue is we feel like we're out of control, so we have to control ourselves in this manner.
Well, if you think about it, we have these coping mechanisms, but what happens is when we get the tools and we learn how to cope, we don't need mechanisms because now we can cope.
Yeah.
We just never learned it because of our childhood trauma. So now we learn it as an adult and we're like, look at me, adulting and coping.
Yeah.
Not getting freaked out and going, oh, I've got this. We can figure this out.
Yeah. And that's what I mean about letting go is all of a sudden you realize you don't need to cope necessarily. You don't need to have some other thing to do to be in control of. You can just let go and realize it's okay.
Imagine that.
Well, it does happen, and it happens gradually. And yeah, it might take driving a van with a big billboard on the side to make you drive differently and react differently. And then you realize, wow, I didn't have to act that way. And it's an amazing feeling to realize sometimes letting go is the best way. Just letting go of control. You don't have to be in control of everything.
This is what I was, when you were talking about it, what I was associating it with, that it doesn't feel logical, like letting go of control. You were kind of setting that stage. It's like, it feels like you need it to control. But when you think about driving in snow, you do the reverse of what you want to do. You don't turn, you turn into the slide, and it's kind of like that. You just kind of,
and you don't brake.
Counterintuitive. It doesn't seem right. But when you do it, it's like, wow, look at that works.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, that was great. That was really interesting to talk about that. And especially just that you and I have both experienced the freedom from letting go of some of those things. I mean, we probably all have a lot of things. And I mean, I feel like I'm always going to be learning and growing, but as I'm able to put things down, let go of things, even like with my son, you can love someone and care about him, but you don't necessarily get to control their life. And that's actually nice. I don't want anyone controlling me. So.
Well, and it's funny because I was thinking about this because I realized it's something you kind of take for granted after you've learned it. Once you've learned that letting go is the way that gets you to this place of freedom from these coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
But once you're at that place, you forget that's the way you do it because it becomes natural. And so you realize, oh, I didn't even think about it anymore. But it takes thoughtfulness and awareness, and it's a process of paying attention. And it took me a while. It took me a long time because I liked my coping mechanisms
and that's
too
what
much.
I was saying. I know.
So it took me a while to handle them.
Yeah. But look, you did. And then you met Charnel and you have this great marriage. Yeah. It was so worth it.
Oh, yeah, it is so worth it because they will control your life. They you think you're in control by using these, but they're really controlling you.
Yeah, that's true.
And
it's like that thing when you say, if you're pointing your finger at someone, 3 fingers are pointing back. Yeah. That's so good. That's so great. Well, this is a good time for us to pray.
Take a minute. Pray. That's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, and I praise you for your giving us free will, and you're loving us for what we love, but you also want to guide us, and you want to give us inspiration and hope. And Lord, I just pray that we will take our hope from you, and we will rely on you for guidance, because we know that we don't always have good guidance, and we don't always do the things or go the directions that are good for us. And Lord, I just pray that for anyone listening, that they would look to you for guidance and hope, and that they would rely upon you rather than other crutches, that they would turn to you and be blessed by you, Lord. And I just pray that for anyone listening, they would have the wisdom to be clear about their lives and understanding what it is that they rely on and what they turn to when they're struggling, and that maybe they can pause and try something else and look for ways that are going to help them but aren't going to control them. And Lord, I pray that you would be there through this process for them. In your name I pray.
Father, I feel like it's that Carrie Underwood song, Jesus Take the Wheel, that we've been driving this car for too long and it's not working the way we're doing it, and that we might give it up to you. And I love that verse that says, search me, O God, and know my heart, and see if there's any wicked ways in me. And I don't know about wicked, but even destructive ways. And Lord, that we can ask you to show us where we can let go and let you take control, and that we can find some peace and let go of that anxiety. I thank you that you're a good God, and that we really can look to you for answers. And, you know, in the Bible, it says, ask. You don't have because you don't ask, and that we can ask you to help us, to ask you to open our eyes and to help us to see the things that are destructive to us or to our family, and that we can begin to change them and get the freedom that you want for us and get the blessings that you've already given us. I thank you that you are a loving God. In your Son's name, amen.
Amen.